Hey guys, today at the advice of others I'm going to talk about the center of the circle. So, I wrote this as a paper in college. Basically the idea is that it's based on Hans Georg Gadamer's idea of philosophical hermeneutics, and I don't say that to make you yawn, I just say that so you know where it's coming from. But some of the ideas basically sort of go like this. So, as human beings, we perceive, life around us. But perception isn't all we do, we also do interpretation, which means that what we perceive is then interpreted. And how do we interpret information is based upon all the information we've gathered. So, as you learn, your interpretations of what you perceive change. So as you continue to experience things, you continue to learn things, you can take it very simply, like if you continue to play a musical instrument, you get better and better because, in part, you learn by having one perception and then comparing that to another perception, then another perception, as well as progressing with your coordination. But when we come to life, and this is really more where this idea comes in, when we talk about our overall holistic interpretation of life, it's basically a series of interpretations that are compiled together, and then through interpreting, new information and new experiences as it comes in, we begin to have what's known as sort of like a circle of interpretation. And it's called our boundaries, our horizons. It becomes like a circle, okay? And so if you believe that how we perceive, or like a graphical symbol, if you were, of our ability to interpret is like an ever-expanding circle. So as more and more information comes into the circle goes larger and larger, and our consciousness or framework of interpretation has more and more data to draw from, and then that results in us having increased creative potential or increased, wisdom possibly over what we're perceiving and what we're experiencing. And so this model of consciousness, as it were, this model of interpretation, acknowledges that we have limits, you see, because we have boundaries, but that those boundaries and those limits can grow, they can change, they can expand, and basically that all of life is about trying to learn and encompass these ideas and expand our horizons. And this is what Hans Georg Gadamer said through philosophical hermeneutics, or his book called Truth and Method. This is a very, very large book, and this is just one idea from that book. Anyway, so what I was studying this, and one of the things that I was dealing with, or themes I was talking about at the time, was what were the similarities between the world's major religions. And this was inspired because I saw a little flyer, on a bulletin board somewhere that listed the world's 5 major religions, and then went ahead to completely and carefully outline the differences between them. In fact, that was what it was titled, The Differences Between the World's 5 Major Religions. And what hit me there, just as a philosopher or someone who inquires about life, what I really wanted to know was, what were the similarities between those 5 religions? What was it that they reached for that made them worthy of the name religion, and what were they reaching for? Because it seemed to me if we could understand what these religions were reaching for, then we become closer to what was actually valuable about them, and what was the core value that we all hoped to obtain from them by participating in them. And so I started doing research, and I came upon, I think it was Franz Schwab, who wrote a book called The Transcendental Unity of All Religions. And one of the things he talked about in this book was that, philosophers, he said, are still trying to sort of figure out whether God does or doesn't exist, if reality does or doesn't exist, etc. Whereas metaphysicists, you proceed to do philosophy from the assumption or from the fact that they've proven that God does exist. So metaphysics, according to Franz Schwab, is the idea of the philosophy you do once you've established the existence of God. So they're actually even more arrogant than philosophers, if that's possible, because they believe that they've already established the existence of God, and so now they're doing the real philosophy, which is the philosophy you do once you realize, understand, and accept that God exists. And the thing for me was that my dad was a devout existentialist, and we really liked Albert Camus. He did not believe there was a God. He did not believe there was an afterlife. And he rigorously believed that once you died, that was it. You were gone. There was never going to be you again. There was no afterlife. That was it. Switch off, light off, the end. I even think he took some comfort in that. And my mother, on the other hand, was very mystical, believes in, she just believes in the spiritual, and she doesn't take this sort of hardline attitude, as some would say, and I don't even know if that's a good word for it. However, my dad did believe that there was more to human existence than just the body. At best, sometimes he talked about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, as it were. So, when I'm reading this, and I'm beginning to realize that while, spiritual beliefs are absolutely important, but once we start saying, any one thing, the idea in some ways is that God has become a divisive topic, at least in American culture. It's not really polite to talk about God anymore in society because that makes everyone uncomfortable, and so it's an impolite, topic to bring up. A lot of things are. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that, I'm going to have a sip of coffee here for a moment, because this is all like, So what struck me is that every human being, regardless of whether they believe in what we term as God, must have something of central, primal importance to them that is at the center of their existence. Because if you're going to view consciousness as an expanding circle, a circle always has a center. Otherwise, it's not a circle. So if we have an ever-expanding circle of information that we all interpret against each other, what I argued with, using a few other sources that I may not get into here, was that every circle of interpretation must have a center focus or prism through which everything is interpreted, the guide, the benchmark by which we do the interpretations. Now, this could be discussed, but I'm just putting this out there that every human being must have something that is of absolute central primal importance to them. Now that could change. It could be changed over time as interpretation comes in. But if you're just going to take it as just, we're just a flat, center of warring interpretations, that's not enough, I think, to actually bring about consciousness. There must be some central importance thing through which, I guess, the self has prioritized to use as a Rosetta Stone against the perceptions of life. This could be God, this could be patriotism, it could be capitalism, it could even be negative things like, rejection of society, which is not necessarily negative depending on the society, but is usually perceived as negative within that society. It could be animal cruelty, it could be, dark gods, or it could be, the opposite. It could be or neutral things, just like I file books in the library. The order of the library is of absolute importance to me. So in other words, order versus chaos is of prime importance to your system interpretation. And, it may sound sort of, how do we say, like systematized, but what I'm really just trying to say is that every human being must have something that is a complete sacred, is sacred to them. Even if the word sacred may not necessarily apply, it's the idea through which, the lens through which you're interpreting everything else. So if you're a troll on the internet, for example, then maybe your prism is people suck and I suck, but at least I can show it to them. And that's a enlightened troll, okay? I'm not saying that's what trolls do, okay? But there's that interpretation. There's this prism here, like, social, values, self-esteem, and, what we're going to do about it, and that's the prism of interpretation. Maybe you're maybe you're working for the ACLU, and so your central interpretation is fairness, justice, because in your life you saw a lot of injustice and unfairness, and now you're trying to make the world a better place, and you really are trying to make the world a better place. It's just who knows what better is. And because we don't know what better is, that's why I offer the idea that all of us has something that is of central importance to them, and that's how they interpret their lives. And if we understand that, this will allow us to give each other the tolerance we need to give each other freedom and liberty.